Hi everyone and welcome back. Now if you clicked on this video, you're probably someone who's already creating content or thinking about creating content. Maybe that's for a digital platform like YouTube, or maybe it's for an analog medium like TV or radio.
Does anyone even listen to radio now?
Either way, there are some do's and don'ts that you need to know about when making content. Let's discuss making content legally. First, it's important to understand the primary components of any piece of content. Usually, this is audio and visual elements. Both audio and visual elements are capable of getting copyright protection. Therefore, when you are making your content, it's important to make sure that you don't violate somebody else's copyright in the process of developing your content. So let me give you a quick introduction as to what copyright is. If you're already familiar with what copyright law is, then feel free to jump ahead to the next part of this video. The timestamp should be somewhere on the screen now. A copyright is a type of intellectual property that gives its owner the exclusive right to copy, distribute, adapt, display and perform a creative work, usually for a limited period of time. Any creative work that satisfies the threshold requirement of originality will be protected by copyright law. Originality usually means that you have not copied your work from somebody else. That means if you're the owner of a copyright, which means you have either created the work or bought the work from somebody else, then you have the exclusive right to use that content for the period of time in which it is protected. Now, according to the World Intellectual Property Organization or WIPO, this right has to last for a minimum of the lifetime of the creator plus 50 years after the death of the creator. But most countries allow this right to last for 70 years after the death of the creator. The creative work can be in a literal, artistic, musical, educational or dramatic form. So things like photographs, songs, movies, TV shows, lectures, stock footage, dialogue and even YouTube clips are protected by copyright. Now it's important to understand that copyrights only protect the original expression and not the idea of that work. So for example, if you had an idea to write a book about a boy wizard who went to a wizarding school, that idea is not protected. But the expression of that idea into a series of books called Harry Potter will be protected by the law. Now there are two types of rights that are granted by copyright. These are economic rights and moral rights. The economic rights are the right to exploit the work financially and to make money from it by selling it, by renting it, by performing it, etc. The moral right, on the other hand, is the right to always be recognized as the author of the work and to not have the work modified or altered without your consent. Right, now that we've understood the basics of copyright law, let's look at how we can create content without violating the rights of other creators and not violating their copyrights. Let's first talk about the visual elements of your content. Now, if you're recording your own content, whether it be A-roll footage like this talking head video where I'm talking to you, or B-roll footage which you record yourself, then you're probably safe because you're recording your own content and therefore not violating upon anybody else's copyright. Remember, copyright law is only trying to prevent you from copying somebody else's work. So if you're recording your own content, then you're probably not violating upon anybody else's copyright. But let's say you can't record your own content. For example, let's say I want to include a visual of a mountaintop in this video. Now I can't record that myself, so I will have to rely on content recorded by other people. The key in that kind of situation is to make sure you get the right or permission to use that content from the creator or the owner of that content. Sometimes you may even have to pay a royalty fee to be able to use that content. There are, however, services that provide stock footage free of charge as well. For example, when I started using B-roll in these videos, I started using the free content provided by a website called Pixels, or is it Pexels? Granted, the free content that were provided were quite limited, but it was free nonetheless. What this meant was that I could use this content without the risk of violating anybody else's copyright. But now I get my B-roll from Canva. Their Pro plan has access to a lot more content, and the monthly subscription I pay gives me a license to use that content. So using content provided by these services will make sure that you don't violate anybody else's copyright, because either these are copyright-free content or you are being granted the license to use this content. The same goes if you use any pictures or photos in your content. Provided you take the photos yourself, then you can use them in your content without violating anybody else's copyright because you have taken the picture yourself. But if you want to and need to use somebody else's photographs, it's important that you get their permission before you use their content. There are a lot of platforms that will provide you with images which are free to use without needing to get permission from anyone. Again, for this purpose, I use Canva, which allows me to use their images in my content. One of the biggest mistakes I've seen content creators do is to copy content from Google searches and use them in their own content. That is a huge violation of somebody else's copyright, because you have to understand these photographs and these images that you are copying from Google could belong to somebody else, and you could be violating upon their intellectual property when you use them without their consent. One thing to note when you are getting content from a content library is to understand the restrictions under which you are allowed to use that content. For example, sometimes these content libraries will tell you that you can use their content, but it can only be used for non-commercial purposes. Whereas some other content libraries will allow you to use that content even for commercial purposes. So it's important to understand what you are allowed to do and not allowed to do when using content from these services. Next, let's talk about the audio elements that you use in your content. Now, provided your content has original dialogue and you record it yourself, then you're probably not violating anybody's copyright. But if you copy somebody else's dialogue and record it, it could be a violation of copyright of a literal work of the original creator. Let's say, for example, you're doing a dramatic reading of somebody else's book. Now, while this might not be a straightforward violation like making a photocopy of a book and selling it, it will still be a violation of copyright because what you have done is create a derivative work without the permission of the original author. A derivative work is an adaptation or transformation or modification of the work from the original medium to a different medium. Now, while there might be some level of originality in your derivative work, you still need to get permission from the original author before creating this derivative work. Now, what about the use of music in your content? Provided you compose your own music and record your own music, or you pay somebody else to compose and record music for you, you can use that content because that content belongs to you and you're not violating anybody else's copyright. But if not, and you need to use somebody else's music, then you need to get permission before you do so. And it's also important to understand that one song can attract multiple copyrights. For example, a song will have one copyright for the lyrics, one copyright for the music, then there will be a separate right for the performer, then there will be another right for the sound recording. So depending on what elements of a song you're hoping to use, you may need to get permission from multiple people. Again, just like in visuals, there are a lot of sound banks that you can subscribe to and sign up for, which will provide you access to their music libraries. There are also some free options out there. For example, the audio library on YouTube allows you access to a lot of music and sound effects free of charge without getting anybody's permission to use in YouTube videos, like this music. But it's important to note that the YouTube audio library only allows you to use that music to create YouTube videos. So for example, I can't use audio from the audio library on YouTube to create TikTok videos. So it's important to understand with these audio banks as well, what are the limitations under which you are allowed to use their content. Is it limited to certain platforms? Are you limited to non-commercial use only? Or are you allowed to use it for commercial use as well? Having understood the basics on how to make content without violating somebody else's copyright, it's also important to know that there are certain exceptions to the law of copyrights. This exception is usually referred to as the fair use exception. Under this exception, you are allowed to use copyrighted content without the authorization of the copyright owner for the purposes of criticism and comment, for teaching, for news reporting, etc. The extent of this exception and what is actually covered by this exception may vary from country to country. So for example, if the content that you're creating is for the purpose of news reporting, then you are allowed to use copyrighted material without the permission of the copyright holder. But of course, this fair use exception has been interpreted quite narrowly, so you have to be cautious when using copyrighted content within this exception as well. Anyway, that's a quick roundup of how to create content legally without violating somebody else's copyright. Hope you found value in this content, and if you did, please do consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more content like this. I'll see you in another episode. Take care. Bye.